Do you think that the world is going to Hades in a handbasket? If you do, you have a lot of company. According to a 2017 survey that questioned more than 21,000 people in 36 different countries around the world, about 60% were in agreement with the statement that the world has become worse in the past year rather than getting better or staying the same. Americans are split on the issue. 41% say that life is worse, while 37% say it's better, which means, I guess, that about 22% don't know what's going on. But I guess that this sentiment is logical. Even in countries with good economies and legitimate, decent governments, considering all the bad news that is being reported. So if you have any connection at all with the larger world, you know that the news is pretty grim right now. We have stories about how bubbling and melting permafrost is creating the potential for 10,000-year-old microbes to escape and infect humans with deadly diseases, and how some newly developed diets can cause long-term eating disorders. And there's the news about the continuing carnage in Syria, the saber rattling by our president, which is unsettling world leaders, the death of thousands of immigrants trying to cross the Mediterranean, and then stories about the squalor of the refugee camps that they live in if they are able to get over to the shores in southern Europe. Over the past year, we have heard about the loosening of environmental and civil rights regulations in the United States that could bring back to us the days of widespread waterborne illnesses and legal discrimination. Then there is the increase in race-related violence and enmity in this country and in other countries, large-scale disease outbreaks around the world, terror attacks in France, Belgium, Florida, Pakistan, mass shootings in the United States and in other countries, dictators pursuing a policy of summarily killing people who they label as bad, religious-inspired attacks on minority populations in India and in Africa, and catastrophic weather events caused by climate change. Whew. That's tiring just to read through that list. That's some list of bad news in our world, and it's far from being an exhaustive inventory, and I'm sorry if I did not have the time to mention your favorite bad thing, but there's just so many. Unfortunately, it is easy to get absorbed and focused almost exclusively on bad things that are going on in the world. Psychologists who look at this kind of stuff say that what makes bad news so attention-grabbing and compelling is that nature has tipped the balance in favor of the negative for us. We seem to be genetically wired to pay attention to bad things, maybe even look for them. In our early human development in human times, it was probably a very good thing that our attention could be easily seized by negative information around us, since it might well indicate an imminent risk to our survival. An early man or woman who always assumed that there was a ferocious beast ready to pounce on them from behind the next rock would usually be wrong, but in the long run, they'd be able to live longer than individuals who did not think about such things. Also, many people have been brought up, especially if they had parents or grandparents who lived through the Depression, to see the world as a place of scarcity and competition, where the good small man is hurt by society. The story of bad things going on in the world, like torture and poverty and racism, feeds into some people's deeply rooted narrative about how bad life is. and therefore that's all they can see. Or some people get caught up in unrealistic expectations about what the world should be like. Expectations about health and safety and treatment of people have risen over the past 100 years. But the shadow side, there is a shadow side to this. The shadow side of this past upward movement and improvement tends to get people expecting society to often meet some impossible standards of perfection. I've heard it called the Star Trek expectation. You know, in Star Trek, there are like no diseases, everyone gets along, you can transport yourself all over the universe. And when that doesn't happen in our real life, people sometimes obsess about how corrupt society is and point out the bad things that are going along as examples of society's failures. And one other thing to think about is that bad news is always reported, while good news about improvements in conditions of the world often do not get reported or are rarely covered. Because, first, they tend to happen over a period of time, and second, they tend to be large in nature. Slow and steady improvement is hard to see, and large-scale changes are hard to put in quick sound bites for news stories. So, good news about things that are going right, other than once in a while the human interest story, good news about the things that are right with the world are overlooked or ignored by Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, and the local ABC, CBS, and NBC affiliates. But they are there. They are there. Good things are happening in the world, good things that rival any of the bad things that are so eagerly reported and that catch our attention. Just think, for example, while environmental disasters do happen, there are hundreds, maybe thousands of small and large environmental cleanup endeavors taking place around the world that are helping our planet. These are happening because more people are aware of the environment than just a few decades ago. Sort of like the micro beach cleanup campaigns that have been formed around the world, sparked by one California woman's personal pledge to spend 20 minutes a day for 1 year picking up trash at her local beach. These micro beach cleanups and all sorts of other environmental activities are happening because of increased environmental awareness, which is one good thing about the world. Another good thing that is not really seen is that technology has been providing a continually expanding number of people with access to both the vast sea of information and to other human beings around the globe, giving people today, even in remote villages and developing countries, opportunities for intellectual and economic growth that would not have been possible, that was not possible even a few years ago. Like the new initiatives in Africa that I just read about to use information technology to help the small subsistence farmer better utilize the scarce water resources that they may have, or give them information about crop prices in different markets to increase their bargaining power with the middlemen. Or the news that an estimated 300,000 more people are gaining access to electricity every day. Or the news that cell phones are giving communication access to millions of people in remote areas, so they can not only talk to relatives, but transfer money and do business deals. Unfortunately, there will always be human suffering throughout the world. But there's also more awareness of this suffering and more sensitivity to it than in any time past. Just think about all of the initiatives being undertaken by religious and secular organizations to alleviate hunger and disease, which were not even in people's consciousness just a few decades ago. We had no idea how people lived in Central and South America and in Africa. These type of initiatives are what is right with the world. And literacy initiatives around the globe that have been happening over the past few decades are something that is right with the world. Now, illiteracy has been the norm for centuries, but today there are dozens of literacy programs, even in some of the remotest parts of the world. It can be said that never before in human history has the earth had so many literate people as today. And think that since 1988, polio has almost been eliminated from the world. Do you know there were only 22 reported cases of polio in the whole world last year? And so far this year, there are only 8 reported cases. This is something right with the world. And you know one other thing that is right with the world? One other thing that I think is very important that is right in this world? Unitarian Universalism is something that is right in this world. For 200 years, our antecedent faith traditions and our current iteration have given people a way to experience religious practice and explore spirituality in an environment that welcomes intellectual inquiry and free discussion of the great questions of life. You know, the all questions, the great questions. You know, why am I here? You know, what happens after death? These types of questions are welcome in Unitarian Universalist congregations unbound by dogma or creed. And for 200 years, we have worked to bring equity and justice to people who have traditionally been marginalized. This is a good thing in the world. So I could go on and on with examples of things that are right or good with the world. And we all know that the world is not perfect, and yes, there are bad things happening. I guess when hasn't there been bad things happening? But if we allow ourselves only to focus on the bad, the wars, the environmental mistakes, the evil political agendas and practices, we can make ourselves depressed. We can lose joy and become cynical curmudgeons like Walter. You know who Walter is? Yeah, a puppet character by Jeff Dunham. Curmudgeonly old man. I love Walter. No way describes me, but like Walter. Well, some days. Anyway, but that is no way to live. Walter's life is no way to live. And yes, we need to be aware of bad things that are happening, and we should work our best to eliminate or at least alleviate their effects. But what is equally or even more important for us to have a good, full, balanced life is to notice, really notice what is right about the world, and then talk about it and build upon it and grow it. So today when we have celebrated something right with the world by dedicating a beautiful child, I'm going to suggest that we engage in a spiritual practice, a type of mindfulness, to be an antidote to the negativism that can so easily creep into our lives. I'm calling this the everything is going to Hades in a handbasket banishment exercise. The first part of this exercise is to eject the yes, but response that we so often hear in UU circles. Eject that from our vocabulary. Yes, that beach is now free of trash, but there's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And yes, we have eliminated almost all polio in the world, but there are about 10 possible pandemics just waiting to spring up. The second step, the second part of this, everything, this spiritual exercise of everything that is going to Hades and handbasket banishment, is to look for good facts and turn them into good experiences. When we notice something good happening, we need to let ourselves feel good about it and resist the urge to rush on. Let's actually spend some time with it. There are plenty of opportunities to do this. It's just a matter of training ourselves to look for the good and then think about it. And then the third part of this spiritual exercise is to really enjoy that experience. Now, it doesn't have to be a bells and whistles type of experience. It can be the one woman cleaning up her beach every day, or the one man liquidating his investments to finance a good food distribution program in one village in Africa. Or, as I know personally, the work of a 6-year-old who formed a nonprofit to collect baby food for children of migrant workers in Chester County, Pennsylvania. What is important is to make a point of staying with that experience, thinking about it, and recognizing how it really is making the world a better place. And why do we want to do this? Why would we want to actually do something like this? Well, first is to make our lives less dismal, especially what appears to be a time of increasing society angst. Always sniffing out problems and not being happy unless we are pointing them out to others is a very negative way of living. And the second reason we should do this is to plant seeds of joy in the world. When we look for and talk about what is right versus what is horribly wrong with the world, we can be guides to others to help them enjoy the world more. So perhaps then, as we go from this sanctuary to engage once again in our everyday world that unfortunately does have bad things happening in it, we may want to hold in our hearts the work of poet Eliza Mimsky in her reflection called "What is Right with the World Today?" Color, sound, words, laughter, phone calls, texts, plans, movies, grandchild, granddog, son, the son, job, money, fighting, loving, talking, listening, me, you. So be it.